Hey everyone, welcome back. Get ready, because today we're diving deep into, well,
Gothic literature.
yeah, Gothic lit. And not just any stories. We're talking about two absolute titans, Dracula and Frankenstein. And the question we're tackling is
A big one.
huge.
Yeah.
Which one deserves the crown, the title of ultimate Gothic masterpiece?
I mean, it's a debate that's been going on forever.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And for good reason. We asked you guys what you thought, and we got a ton of passionate responses. Some folks are all about Dracula, you know?
The atmosphere,
Totally.
that creepy castle, the fog rolling in, the sense that something bad is about to happen. Like, you can just feel it.
Yeah.
Not to mention Dracula himself. He's like the vampire. Everyone knows him.
Iconic.
Totally iconic. But then we've got others who are Team Frankenstein all the way.
And they bring up some great points.
Yeah, like Frankenstein really makes you think, doesn't it? It's not just about scares. It's about these deeper questions, like what it means to be human. And the creature, man, he's not just a monster. He's a tragic figure. You kind of feel sorry for him.
Oh, for sure. You can really empathize with him.
So, ready to get into it.
Let's do it.
All right. So let's start with Dracula. Why does this novel just scream Gothic? I mean, it's got all the classic ingredients, right?
It totally does. I mean, think about it. You've got these gloomy, crumbling castles in Transylvania, shrouded in mist and darkness.
Right. Super creepy.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the whole setting, right? It's like literally isolated from the rest of the world, which, just adds to that feeling of being trapped, of being cut off from help.
Oh, for sure. Like, nobody's going to hear you scream, basically.
And then on top of that, you've got all these supernatural elements too. The undead rising from their graves, the crucifixes, and garlic used to ward off evil, all that good stuff.
Oh, yeah. All that religious symbolism, it's like a constant battle between good and evil.
And that's what really makes Dracula such a classic Gothic novel, right? It plays on those primal fears, those anxieties we have about death, about the unknown, about the things that go bump in the night.
Totally. I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
But there's also this other layer to Dracula that I think is really fascinating.
Oh, what's that?
Well, it's the way Stoker uses these Gothic tropes to actually comment on some very real Victorian anxieties.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, think about the way he portrays female sexuality, especially through Dracula's brides. It's like he's tapping into this fear that was pretty prevalent at the time, this fear of women's desires, especially when those desires were seen as somehow,
Dangerous.
exactly, dangerous, transgressive, even monstrous.
Hmm. That's a really good point. I never thought about it like that before.
And it's not just female sexuality. You can see these anxieties about disease, about contamination woven throughout the novel, too. Like the way the vampire bite is described, it's almost like a metaphor for...
For like a disease spreading?
Yeah, exactly. And at the time, there was a lot of fear around things like syphilis, which, could be transmitted through...
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see how those fears might have fed into the whole vampire myth.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot more going on in Dracula than just spooky castles and vampires.
Oh, yeah. It's a novel that's really rich with layers of meaning.
That makes me think, too, about how Dracula himself, I mean, he's more than just a monster, isn't he? He's like a symbol of something bigger.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. He's this foreign count, this outsider who comes to England and threatens their way of life. And that really tapped into a lot of Victorian anxieties about immigration.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
They were kind of obsessed with the idea of the other
Yeah.
back then, weren't they?
They were. And you can see that reflected in the way Dracula is described. He's this dark, mysterious figure who represents everything that the Victorians were afraid of.
So it's like Dracula is both a terrifying horror story and a commentary on what was happening in Victorian society at the time.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes it such an enduring novel, I think. It speaks to these deep-seated fears that are still relevant today.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about the atmosphere, the social commentary, but we can't forget about Dracula himself. I mean, he's basically the vampire, right? Like every vampire story that came after is kind of embedded to him.
Oh, 100%. He's the blueprint, the pale skin, the fangs, the aversion to sunlight, the hypnotic gaze. Stoker really nailed it with this character.
Yeah, he's like the OG vampire.
Yeah.
And I bet a lot of that has to do with how he's been portrayed in pop culture too, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about Bela Lugosi's iconic performance in the 1931 film, that image of Dracula with the slicked back hair and the cape. I mean, it's just ingrained in our minds.
Yeah, that's the Dracula everyone pictures. All right, so we've covered Dracula. Creepy castles, a villain who represents societal fears, and a legacy that just won't quit.
Pretty impressive.
It is. But now, let's switch gears and talk about Frankenstein. If Dracula is all about these external horrors, these monsters lurking in the shadows, Frankenstein feels a bit more internal, doesn't it? Like it's about the darkness inside us.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. It's like with Dracula, the threat is very much external. But with Frankenstein, the horror comes from within, from our own ambitions, our own desires.
Exactly. And it all starts with Victor Frankenstein, right? He's this brilliant scientist, but he's
A
also,
little bit arrogant.
yeah, totally. He's got this huge ego.
Mm.
And that ultimately leads him down this really dark path.
Right. He becomes so obsessed with this idea of creating life, of pushing the boundaries of science, that he completely loses sight of the potential consequences.
Yeah, it's that classic playing God story.
Exactly. And the really tragic thing is that Frankenstein, he does create life,
What?
but then he abandons his creation. He rejects it.
Yeah.
And that's what sets the whole tragedy in motion.
Right. And that seems like something that's even more relevant today, doesn't it? I mean, we're living in this age where technology is advancing so rapidly. We're doing all these incredible things with science, but sometimes it feels like we're not really stopping to think about the ethical implications.
Oh, for sure. Like, just think about the debates surrounding gene editing or artificial intelligence. Frankenstein serves as this powerful cautionary tale about what can happen when we let our ambitions get the better of us.
It's like Shelley was way ahead of her time in a lot of ways.
She really was. I mean, think about it. This novel was written over 200 years ago, and yet it's still so relevant to the conversations we're having today.
Totally. Okay, but let's talk about the creature himself for a second, because he's such a fascinating character, right? He's not just a monster.
Yeah.
He's got this depth, this complexity to him.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely one of the most misunderstood characters in literature. And I think a lot of that has to do with how he's been portrayed in pop culture.
Right, like those old movies where he's just this big, lumbering brute.
Exactly. But if you actually read the novel, the creature is so much more than that. He's intelligent, he's articulate, he's capable of feeling deep emotions.
Yeah, and he really craves love and acceptance, doesn't he?
He does, and that's one of the most tragic things about him. He's rejected by his creator, he's rejected by society, and that leads him down a path of anger and revenge. But even in his darkest moments, you can still see the spark of humanity in him.
He's really a product of his circumstances in a lot of ways, isn't he?
He is, and I think Shelley does a brilliant job of making us question our own prejudices, our own definitions of what it means to be human.
Yeah, she really forces us to look in the mirror, doesn't she?
No.
To confront the ways in which we judge and exclude others who are different from us.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why Frankenstein continues to resonate so strongly with readers today, because these themes of prejudice, of social justice, they're just as relevant now as they were back then.
So here we are. We've got these two amazing novels, both of which have had a huge impact on literature and culture. Dracula, with its Gothic atmosphere, its exploration of social anxieties, and its iconic villain. And Frankenstein, with its philosophical depth, its tragic creature, and its enduring relevance to our own ethical dilemmas. I mean, it's almost impossible to choose a winner, isn't it?
It really is. I think both novels offer something unique and valuable. And ultimately, the question of which one is better is really a matter of personal preference. It's about which story speaks to you on a deeper level, you know?
Right. It's like which monster resonates more with your own fears and anxieties? Which story makes you think the most?
Exactly. And I think that's what's so great about literature, right? It gives us this opportunity to engage with these big ideas, to explore different perspectives, and to ultimately come to our own conclusions.
Couldn't said it better myself.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're saying is, if you haven't read these novels yet, you're missing out.
Big time.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Go check them out, and then let us know what you think. Who wins the Gothic showdown in your mind? Is it Dracula? Or is it Frankenstein? Hit us up on social media, and let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
All right, well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Until next time, happy reading.
And happy haunting.
Ooh, spooky.